Welcome back to day 2 of our Humanities Design Summit. And hello to our audiences in Asia, Europe, and the United States. Yesterday we focused on minds and meaning. And we saw that there's an emerging science that can measure human flourishing, happiness, how well off we are. A science that can actually allow us to become better off, even if it's not what our intuition tells us. And in your breakouts, you began to work with the ideas that these could be built into our built environment, into our cities, that there could be measurement, ways of building structures that lift us up in some spiritual way beyond functionality, and that all of this could be part of technology and mechanisms of feedback. There are moments in human history where all of this comes together. And such a place was this, right here, 100 years ago. This is the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. Today, it's a Boasschaert relic. But 100 years ago, in 1915, it was the Panama Pacific Exposition, a world's fair that brought together everything about the 20th century. Speed, the opening of the Panama Canal, progress, cities of the future, the arts at the Palace of Fine Arts, and an exaltation of the human spirit using that newest technology, electricity. Everywhere, lights, experimenting with how they could make things more exciting, elevate us. I bring this up because I think every so often when change is afoot, we celebrate these things. In 1939, there was a World's Fair that introduced the suburbs, introduced roads and television. In many ways, some of the factors that we're moving beyond today. And I think we're here and convened at a similar turning point in history, which is why today we're turning to the arts and sciences. Dr. Beth Coleman will soon lead us through an exercise where we hear from experts who show us how the massive technology in our cities require new forms of trust, new forms of ethics, how all of this can come together in integrated systems in our cities, but ultimately comes back to the notion of self.
Hey everyone, welcome to day 2. The purpose of this video is twofold. One, it's to expand your idea a little bit about what transformative technology might be. And 2, it's to give you a sense of where this event fits into the overall roadmap of what we're doing. So yesterday you heard that transformative technology is any time the exponential technologies are applied to the inner landscape. And one might ask, why might that be important? Well, if you look on this slide, you'll see this is a list of the top 10 skills required for the future of work. And what you will notice is almost all of these skills are human interaction skills, social emotional skills. And if you've been thinking about it, you'll realize that we don't teach these in our society intentionally at all at scale. We don't teach emotional self-regulation. We don't teach self-awareness. We don't teach social emotional learning. People just pick it up from the culture, which basically means that we are leaving the entire future to chance, to luck. This is a great use for technology. So I'll show you an example. This is Moxie. Moxie is the social emotional wellness robot. And Moxie is a fascinating case. Moxie helps children with their social emotional learning, but it raises the question, what is a robot? Dmitry Grishin, who runs a large robotics firm here, says a robot is anything that supports you. So then why not a city? A city can be a robot. That's the upper left-hand image. A bench at a beautiful view, why not that be a robot? A room be a robot? Or if you're looking at the image on the upper right, The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson, the core of that book was about a book that reacted to the child who was reading it and taught each child exactly what they needed to know at that stage of their development, given the context of their life. So what is a robot? Expand your definition of what it might be. Also yesterday in our sessions, people talked about wearables and wearable technology and saying, there's too much information, there's an overload. Well, the watch on the left could easily be the watch on the right, which is entirely made out of wood for the most part. And so, the point of this is that we're the designers. We design this, and we can design the technology too. This is one of my favorite products. It's called Neosensory. And what it does is it takes sounds and translates them into haptic senses. Their number one market are people who have hearing issues, who are, wanting to hear more of their loved ones, and it helps them. For example, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks for the brain to start to add haptic feedback into a sense of hearing. Now, it turns out that people who are perfectly able to hear also use this to feel laughter and to feel music when they hear it. And so when you think of augmentation, when you think of wearables, don't just think of what you've seen today. Maybe think of people at a concert and hearing every single other human heart and feeling those hearts, not just knowing that they exist, or walking through a forest and not just benefiting from forest bathing, but actually hearing and feeling the mycelial network, feeling the connection in the forest. This is possible. And this is a sense of expanding our senses, expanding of who we are, so we can have a greater sense of oneness with one another and with the planet that we're on. Like, don't limit your idea of what augmentation is to sort of like a crappy watch. Like, it's more than that. It can be more than that. And that is the point of this section, that is, as designers, we can decide the problem that we're working on and the solution, and what we're solving for. And then we can figure out the technology to make it as seamless or as frictionless or as in the background as you want it to be. And so remember, anywhere that there's exponential tech, there is a path for human well-being applications. And so with that, I want to share with you what this process is. So we sent you an email, we sent you a PDF, we sent you an FAQ, which goes into detail about where we are. The purpose of this event is to inspire, but the next one is ideating, scoping, the next two things. And what that is to actually scope 3 to 5 experiments where Mistletoe will be paying for the scoping of this. So the fellows and the PhD students to actually scope these into fundable experiments, meaning clear, academic grade, all the things that, trust me, are in the PDF. Please read it. And so with that, then Mistletoe is going to go out to its peers, peer foundations, peer cities, peer governments, and say, hey, we've got this beautiful basket of experiments. And if you co-fund these with us, then we can advance the human body of knowledge so that the cities can be better. Because you saw yesterday on that chart, there is a big gap on city scale flourishing. And so if we can solve that, we can really change the way we build. And so this is not 3 days of people talking. That is not what's happening here. What's happening here is that we are co-ideating in order to get to fundable, scopable experiments that then can be taken out by someone other than yourselves, because that's a burden, but taken out to get the support to do it. And so, this is just the first step, and you're an essential part of it. Do we know who those co-funders are? No, we don't. We have some ideas, people we talk to regularly, but do we know who those co-funders are? No. We have to show them the experiments. Do we know what the experiments are? No. We have to go through the process. And so that's what this is, and we're so grateful for you joining. And so I want to introduce to you your guide for today, and you're so very lucky to have the amazing Beth Coleman. Beth is an associate professor at the University of Waterloo, and she is an expert in experimental and experiential design. In addition, she is an expert in virtual reality, machinima, racist technology, game theory, race theory. I mean, she's really amazing. And she's done geofilms, virtual worlds, and she's really going to be diving into the arts and sciences part as your guide, which you are going to love. So have a great day today, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Peter and Nicole. So I'm not Mickey, I'm Beth. Hi. But I'm using Mickey's diagram because I really love the way it intertwines the things that we're doing here. And it's a great start for thinking about where we are with arts and science as a pedal. So for a long time, particularly when thinking about cities, the two categories of arts and science were separated. You had engineering and you had culture. You had planning and you had architecture. You had smart and you had, I don't know, dumb, something like that. So let's pause for a moment and look at the issues that have underscored the last decade of smart development. Much of it has been technologically driven and has neither engaged with socio-technological systems, so that's the social and the technological enmeshed again as they are, or the more rich but difficult to quantify social relations of community and trust that, in my view, and perhaps yours as well, is foundational to a happy, productive, and creative city. What we've been served is an oversaturation of engineering in IoT and algorithmic production that produces primarily surveillance technologies that are by design extractive and flattening of experience and spirit. And who wants their spirit flattened? Not us. So we gather under the sign of art and science to see how we might shift and grow and embrace urban design that prioritizes exchange, such as participatory design, co-design, and an ethos of care, community, and discovery. In imagining a thriving city, we might think of a comprehensive integrated approach, systems thinking as such, as you'll hear from some of our presenters, where we begin working toward an alignment with the creative, the delightful, the relational, or the environmental, and this, of course, will include the thorny issues of equity, justice, and the inherited violence we live with, in the engagement of scientific method and speculative creative investigation. The idea is that complex problems become opportunities, and creative agency can be stimulated across a scale of individual, community, and city. And that scale, that relation between those three is something that I think we want to keep in mind throughout our entire gathering. So certainly, we've been living through an extraordinary and explosive global moment, which gives us even more motivation to bring together and solution, ideate, iterate, grow powerful and positive responses to the current environment. In some ways, we're building city life from the ground up. We're reconsidering public space, economy, governance, and good relations. The wonderful thing is we have starter kits, models to inspire such a shift, represented in part by the speakers invited to stimulate today's conversation. So we meet under the banner of arts and science, or the joining of method, imagination, and possibility. And listening to our speakers, play with some ideas about your own possible contribution to the collaboration. What experiments do you want to do? Who would be the ideal partners? What resources do you need? And how might you challenge your own habits around who, what, and where is considered in your framework? Okay, let's go to our speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce Poppy Crum. Poppy is a neuroscientist and technologist and the chief scientist at Dolby Laboratories and also an adjunct professor at Stanford University. I know, it's a lot of stuff. Poppy is going to speak with us about her work on the intersection of human experience, artificial intelligence, sensory data science, and immersive technologies. She innovates on the concept of empathetic technology, building technologies that engage psychology, physiology, and interaction with the world. We're asking her to turn that vision to the possibility of a thriving city. Welcome, Poppy.
Thanks for having me be part of this. It's such an amazing event that you're putting on and so relevant and important in the world right now. The things that I'm, I guess, most passionate about, they are personalization and what I call contextual optimization. Technology has been designed for either one size fits all. It assumes we all look the same, which is really prevalent in a lot of technology. I know we talk about bias in AI, but we have built bias in technology. That's what we're trying to break out of. But also, it assumes that we never move. You know, a lot of technologies assume we're always sitting in the same place, and that, you know, the context, our ambient, you know, what's happening in that space is not dynamic. And that completely affects our sensory capabilities in those rooms, in those environments. And even if the intent of an experience is being realized to every demographic and every individual across every time it's touched. A lot of work that we look at is, includes proliferation of sensors in our spaces or on our bodies. The amount of information we can know about each other, know about our environments. How can that be reactive? How can that be more intelligent and give us insight that makes our technology more dynamic to the intent of the user and the intent of a successful application to the user? Also considerations, obviously that's paired with machine learning and artificial intelligence in different directions. Things like the dynamics of my eye, how the diameter of my pupil changes. 15 years ago, that used to be something that we would look at in labs, and the devices to capture the same fidelity maybe cost us $15,000, $20,000. Today, that's going to be, we're on dollars, if not pennies, coming in the next few years as part of every, smart pair of glasses that is, produced and worn around the world. So suddenly you have these platforms where the channel of information about the user is very rich, because the diameter of my eye is responding not just to lighting around me, but it's also responding to how hard my brain is having to work in a particular context. It's also responding to how engaged I am to a particular element or experience. And you start pairing that with other sensors in the environment, and you have knowledge about me that's very unique and very contextually dependent and relevant, where now I can start learning a lot more about the individual. Just in the chemical composition of our breath, you can detect emotion. You can detect how individuals in a space, what kind of emotional and experiential journey they're going on through knowing the carbon dioxide levels in the room and how those have changed relative to certain contextual elements. When you start thinking about the amalgamation of these sensors, it becomes very powerful to consider what a dynamic space would be that is actually serving the user and is really what I like to call empathetic to the intent of the individual. One example I often give is, look, even the smartest thermostat on the market today or in development, really, it doesn't even know if I'm hot or cold. I mean, it's like failing its most critical thing. It may tracking my behaviors, move way past, we tell it what to do, and it's really trying to learn about me, but it doesn't know who I am. It doesn't know what I'm trying to do. And, I may be 115-pound female, or I may be a large male. I may be a woman who's going through menopause. I may be trying to stay up at night and finish a presentation. What's my cognitive intent, my cognitive capacity? How can the information be serving me and serving my success in that environment so that I trust it? Because trust is a big part of it, because it's not that the technology is empathizing with me or reading my emotions. It's about the technology is using tools to optimize and learn information about my internal state, my internal intent, to make me more successful for my goals in that space. I talk about personalization and how a lot of technology right now is built for one size fits all. Something even as simple as a headphone, or I'm sitting here with Beth and she's got AirPods in, right? So to create the experience of sound around us, algorithms have to take into account how sound interacts with the human body, how it bounces off our head, our torso, every ripple of our pinna. So often in technology, it's been built to assume we all look the same, but one size fits all, because that bespoke filter that we each have as we interact with space and sounds is creating a very unique pattern of amplifications and attenuations that our brain is doing. To date, basically every technology assumes we're the same. So these are things that have changed. In the last 5 years, we can use computer vision techniques. We can pair those with machine learning, with neural nets, and we're able to, in very rapid time, completely personalize based on an individual's morphology, basically the shapes of our bodies and even our internal biological composition, personalize the experience so that the intent of that technology and the intent of any experiences delivered over it are really about each of us. Because it's not just, as a female, I am different than a male, but even within any demographic, whether it's ethnicity or its sex, we are very unique. So the answer is really, how we identify that and build for everyone. And the capability that we have today is really completely changed. So we have to make that commitment to identify where these instances exist and not build for one group, but build across all populations.
That is super amazing. And it also, I think, makes clear why ML and AI are central to the work that you're doing in terms of the capacity, potential of absolute customization. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about trust, because my intuition is your argument about customization and how we build to, from individual to community to city, trust will be important there.
Trust and transparency in algorithms is necessary. Trust and transparency in how data is being captured and how it's being used is also critical. A lot of things I talk about require a lot of individual and personal data to make them actually work for each other. I sometimes say, look, you almost have to embrace your inner Minority Report a little bit and look at that, Minority Report 1984. There are these brilliant cautionary tales of how the world can go awry when we fail at, in certain ways. But there are elements of those that help us design to prevent those mistakes if we do wisely and ethically. But at the same time, there's a lot of freedoms that come with the power of this personal data. Because without it, we really are building a lot of technology that's going to work for some people and not work for others. And it's going to elevate some people and not elevate others. And it's going, every stage of development in AI can introduce bias. But right now we have bias in technology. It's not that we have to worry about every one of these pillars and how we build training sets, how we evaluate them, how we audit them. Constant vigilance is not going to go away. Right. But we have to also recognize that, look, I think a lot of the world does not think about how biased our technology is. And it's not, it's whether it's sex or ethnicity or race but age too. Trust in the technology also I'm a big believer in transparency. The amount of information that is captured in different areas is not always transparent, and that's what's broken in so many places. One example that I think is really powerful. There's a lot of effort going on right now in the technology space to amplify what's called aging in place. That's the idea that, someone who is an elder is able, or as you age, you're able to stay autonomous in your own environment, your own home for a much longer period of time, potentially, 10 or 15 years more than you otherwise might have been, where you would have to be in a, care facility or, within your family, if that's an option. This has major implications on individuals' autonomy, their savings, financially, but it also has major health implications, as we've seen in the last few months. And when we think about cities, so aging in place is the idea that I have, a lot of sensors in my environment, a lot of ways of knowing, when I amalgamate those with, intelligent machine learning and such, I'm able to now have a much richer understanding of the success of that individual, the quality of life for them, not just whether they are taking their pills, but also their emotional and mental capacity and need in that environment. Obviously, we're seeing, you're tracking of heart rate through Wi-Fi, but also you're seeing emotions and ways of intervening and ways of knowing where the human connection is really relevant, but also by building that link, by building that connection to the caregivers, you are enabling someone a lot of freedoms. And it's through that amalgamated, intelligence in their spaces that they gain so much capacity and freedom that we know improves them mentally, physically, and, from a health perspective, gives them a lot more protection from risk in different areas.
So that's a really strong example of how a thriving city, what we might be designing toward. And if I'm hearing you right, I'm hearing there a whole arc where we go from individual to community to city.
Absolutely. I am talking about, a place where I know where the individual opportunity is quite substantial, namely because you have a group that has a need that is really underserved, and It gets them a great deal of freedom. It provides a great deal of freedom. Moving to, what does that mean, for the city? When you start to have intelligent spaces that are dynamic, empathetic with me, that are trusted, because it's critical. And we're not talking about her, we're not talking about it's a trust that this environment will be optimized for me to elevate me. When you walk into then the workspace, it's a different question, because that's also a broken environment. I walk into the same room, and when we need new rooms, when we need new spaces, we build new footprints. So how can we think about that optimization, the ways that a room, so in the case of aging in place, I'm using that amalgamated sensing, that network of information about me in my environment to enable me to be autonomous, to be more connected in the workplace. That suddenly becomes, how do I optimize my intent, my goals of a team in an environment that could become modular, and not modular in this, I'll move a table around, but modular in the sense of, I'm dynamically changing, the sounds, the lights, the context, the skins of that space, so that it now is serving a different purpose for that group, but very dynamically.
So the question I have that's specific to what we're doing with Thriving Cities and Audacity is, where are there some gaps in either opportunity or vision that you could work in a different type of way than the context you're in?
The intelligence that becomes a dynamic space is something I think about a lot, but that's a very big topic. And to me, it's a critical part of a future city that is serving us and working with us, and supporting who we want to become. Not who we are, but who we want to become, how we move ourselves in those positive directions, and that we all see. It's one thing to be doing pieces of that and thinking about the applications, or or a user group that's very much in need, such as aging in place. That being said, it's about building that trust and environment into how we design and how we conceptualize and change our mental representation of what a space is for each and every one of us within different cultures and different contexts. And that's a really big topic. I don't think there's another group that's put together the type of a diverse set of perspectives that can take such a thing on. So I really hope you think about that and continue to, and I'd love to be part of it. So there's a film that came out, and it's called The Sound of Silence. I definitely thought about it with your effort. So you and the two filmmakers actually consulted with me for the film, and I was serving two roles. I was making sure when they talked about music that it was fairly accurate representation, but it was also because the main character, as unique as he is, shares certain commonalities to the way I experience the world. Number one, so I have absolute pitch. Every sound I hear, whether it's a refrigerator, whether it's the sound of an HVAC system, whether it's the sound of too much noise in the environment, I ascribe a pitch to it, a note name, and it also has a really visceral interaction on me. I also am a little bit of, I like to say, a gremlin. If, I have a very reactive vagal nerve response to bright lights. If you shine them on me, I will feel it viscerally. It's part of my own rich experience with senses that has caused me to study them. And so, and understand the impact they have on me, that whenever they have positive or negative impacts on me, I want to make sure that other people have the same sort of control and understanding in their environments to be successful, where I've been able to modulate my own environment to make sure that I know what affects me in these different ways, but that's, what I care about. And I want that for everyone. So this film is all about Peter Sarsgaard. He walks into rooms and listens to the sound of them. So he'll and tries to solve the problems in people's lives, their relationship problems, their problems at work, solely through the sounds in their living room. And he'll walk in and he'll hear, the radiator and say, that's a B flat, and your teapot is going off at this, and that's creating discordance in your life. The funny thing is, as much as that is meant to be, it's fictional, there's reality in it, not just for me, but for other individuals, for everyone. The reality is that we move in different ways. Our environments cause us to to interact in them in different ways that ultimately does impact our brains when we walk into different contexts, when we walk into different environments. Every time we engage in a different space, we're creating contextual cues that can influence how our senses, how our sensitivities, how our attention is modulated, how it's optimized. And when you start thinking about that on a city scale, it's a very real thing that, we create our environments are changing us. It becomes a cycle. Everything we do in different spaces is affecting, how our brain is allocating resources. Whether I grew up in a village in Afghanistan or a town in the Midwest or New York or Kathmandu or any different environment, the context of color, contour, sounds in my environment shapes how my brain is going to allocate resources to allow me to be successful in that space, in that, whether it's rural, whether it's urban, even the colors and dynamics of a different neighborhoods in New York City or in Manhattan. It alters us in ways that we often don't realize, but it's those unique adaptations that our brain is making to allow us to be effective and in our environments are things that we can be aware of. And it's part of how we can shape a city and think about what is that dynamic neuroplasticity of the environment and how is it going to shape us in different ways. I can look at hearing thresholds across the world and know what city someone's in. Suddenly you're in a place where you start thinking about, okay, these are the things that make us successful in these environments. And are these good? Are these bad? How are these limiting us or affecting us in deleterious ways or in positive ways? And how do we design from a sensory augmentation, sensory capacity, neuroplasticity perspective? I have personally experienced my world changing, and I think there's a lot of opportunity if we think that way to have empathy and bring together a lot of diverse perspectives and great human capability.
You just set my day off in a terrific direction. I'm just like, oh, now I'm going to get to think about all these things. Poppy, thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Tom Boasschaert, who's the founder and director of Accept Integrated Sustainability Design, a group that powerfully integrates science and research, design and engineering, business and management toward their symbiosis and development framework. We're delighted to have Tom share his experience of working on over 600 projects worldwide and simulate our thoughts on the futures of thriving cities. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Beth, for that introduction. My name is Tom Boasschaert. I am the director and the founder of Accept Integrated Sustainability. The core of the question that we really look at is how can we look forward and act today to start flourishing as humanity on this planet? Part of that challenge is certainly that we have to deal with a lot of competing challenges at the same time. Some of them are infrastructural in nature, have to do with energy, pollution in the environment. Others have to do with people and how we organize ourselves, how we distribute value, how we distribute power. Some of it has to do with how we deal with the ecosystems around it and how we deal with, the intersection of our industrialized society with nature and the place that we live. And we see that the challenge is to find solutions that bring all of these together and not just focus on the single issue items. And with that team, we've done many different things, from small community projects to very large infrastructures, looking at the future of nations and islands, and everything's always done from a systemic long-term perspective. And that way we try to develop great places to live, work, play, and prosper. We've been working on algae farms to help local communities prosper in an economic sense and also make use of the ecological resources that they have in a positive way. And also very high-tech things like vertical agriculture, growing food inside of buildings for urban environments, also completely financially viable. So that business side of things is a very important component of it, including the social aspects of who stands to benefit and how are the power relationships within the systems that we create. And of course, nature is often the engine behind all of it, really feeding and empowering the systems that we do, while also increasing quality of the air and water, increasing biodiversity, increasing the livelihoods of people that depend on this for a long time. So the way that we do it, the way that we approach it was always in a systemic sense. That means that we go through a rigorous process to do it, but also we look at society from a systemic perspective to make sure that we include all of the aspects that are important, but also to look at more long-term patterns of how our society, the nature of our society develops. So symbiosis in development is the framework that we've developed for the past 20 years. It combines all of these aspects of circular economy, blue economy, systems thinking, but also natural capital, social justice into one single approach. We divide up society along a couple of object categories, like energy and materials, but also ecosystems and species. Economy and culture as a whole, it's our society, and also of the individual happiness and health of everyone that is involved. And that together culminates into three different aspects of sustainability, one of them being autonomy, and autonomy being to be able to take care of yourself. So that's the circular economy, having enough energy, material resources, and so on. One of them is resilience, which means that your capacity of dealing with unexpected events, capacity to adapt, to quickly respond to changing conditions, and harmony, which has to do with power divisions, social inclusivity, social justice issues, and so on. So if a system like a city or a country is sustainable, it means that it can take care of itself, it can react positively and recover from unexpected events, whether they're natural or man-made, and they're harmonious, so that the people inside are at peace with one another. And that's when we say we have created a sustainable system, which is definitely something we do not yet have. So the process goes from initiation and team formation, including stakeholders, including involving the community, collecting a lot of data, doing systemic analysis using system mapping tools, and looking at different things like complexity analysis. Then we go through a solution innovation phase, which involves co-creation with all those different disciplines. And then together we work on the execution of the plan, making the feasibility study, and making sure that it can be executed, it's financially sound, it's responsible from an engineering perspective, and so on. So the whole methodology has been written down in a book. It's also completely free to download as a PDF on this website here. So if you're interested, it's also open source, which means that you can use any part of it to your own benefit. So parts of the co-creation, system mapping, looking at the energy and material flows, ecosystem responses, economic flows and connectivity, social aspects, and so on. For each project that we do, we make these maps to communicate and learn and improve our insight. And these can get quite complex, but the visual representation, so the combination of the science and the design, really helps in this regard to make sure that everyone that's involved, from the psychologists and the ecologists to the engineers and the politicians and the investors, all kind of understand what we're talking about. And that's very essential in that process. One other project I would like to show you, it's more on the social side of things. This is an existing social housing neighborhood in the city of Rotterdam. And it was really in a poor condition with a lot of crime, a lot of household waste, feelings of insecurity, friction between different groups within the community. And the challenge for us was, with very limited financial means, to create a development plan over 20 years' time to make this one of the most sustainable communities in the world. So we set out and we involved more than 100 different stakeholders, including many of the participants and the community members themselves. We went proactively out to find them and talk with them into high schools and community centers, and going to people's houses. And also, again, making those systemic analyses and trying to make a plan that's both from an energy material standpoint, from an ecological standpoint and food production, but also from a social standpoint, very important to try to find ways to reconnect the population, to provide empowerment to people to take self-control and responsibility, and have that community really be supported in their development. So here's an example of a system map. This is mostly energy material loops. You can see that it's entirely closed in about 20 years, where all the energy materials of all the housing blocks are kept within the community, and a lot of food is being produced by using the interstitial spaces between the buildings. This is a very technical perspective, but each one of these blocks has a social aspect to it. And one of the beautiful results of that is that the food production that we've planned in the intermediate spaces all has a social component to it. So there are components where the elderly population has assigned agriculture areas where they can together decide, and with the help of professional growers, produce food, mostly bringing them together and resolving issues like loneliness and support. And that has been of great value also for the social service agencies that are operating within the neighborhood. But also we detected that there was a quite large population of women in families with an Islamic background. From a traditional perspective, they were not allowed to leave the house. And so we found a way to make these gardens as an official extension of the house. As a private garden can be an extension of the house, so these women could leave and they could start tending with their garden. And when that happened, they started getting connections with each other. And they were very eager to do that, and that developed into a very strong social community that eventually was able to break through some of those traditional patterns. And that allowed this community of women to emancipate themselves and to start their own little company in catering for office lunches and so on, all generated from their own private gardens. So there was a respect from the religious backgrounds and the traditional values. There were a lot of very happy people, and there was a huge breach of an impasse from a social perspective. And here in the top left corner, you can see the women that founded their own catering company. In the top right, you see a restaurant that was created, also a community event where people could eat for just €5, and people could learn to cook and also learn to work in a restaurant at the same time. And in the bottom right, you see one of the elderly people that lived in the community that had a background in greenhouse construction. We arranged a second-hand little greenhouse, and he provided the nursery to actually, go from seed to small baby plants, and he hands them out to the community, which makes it much, much easier for people to grow their own food. And there's all of this interaction that really boosted this entire community, while the buildings themselves are reasonably untouched and can develop over a 20-year period. There were lots and lots and lots of neighborhood got safer. The rankings in happiness of people went much higher. Self-education, cultural exchanges taking place, but also the economic value of the place rose, which was really good for the property developers involved. I hope to have given you a little bit of an introduction, and I hope to talk to all of you soon. Good luck in the conference, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Tom. We have next Dr. Agnis Stibe, who brings robust arguments regarding a conscious city and the work of becoming more self-aware as a critical aspect of thriving at all levels of personal, community, and city life. His work from the City Science Group at the MIT Media Lab to the founding of Transform.me addresses questions of transformation across vectors of intelligence, leadership, behavior, AI, and neuroscience. Thank you, Agnis.
Let's imagine a city that really feels, really understands, and really cares about human well-being and human flourishing. What is really essential for human nature? Of course, all of these evolutionary leaps that we had previously, like the industrial, like technological, it all brought us to this point. And then once we have all of this access, all of the nicely built infrastructures, nicely available technologies, and they will be advancing further on, the reminder is for all of us, what role plays the real deep understanding of the human nature in all of that evolution. Because we can evidence that technology can be built of various kinds, and that all of the technology is supporting our well-being. Not all of the technology is actually contributing to our flourishing. Sometimes we get addicted to technologies from the early age, and we don't want that. Let's remember one thing. Technology is bearing the intent of its designer. The same way also the design of a city is bearing the intent of the architects and also the people planning the city or the urban space or the district. Essentially, what is now the most important question? Do we understand our own human nature to the depth that we could give proper and meaningful instructions and requirements for the tech developers and for the city architects and planners? Coming from my work, from the scientific work about the typology of change, there are three types. There is transaction, which is a one time. So you can do one thing one time and it would be a change in your life, but it would be just tiny. And then transition, which means for a period of time. And some people really in January say, oh, this year I'm going to do this different thing. And they do it for 1 year, but it doesn't promise that they will continue for the next year. And therefore, after transaction and after the transition, which is a period of time, there should be a transformation. Why? Because from my work and from all of the large body of knowledge from the scientists, if we really want to have a fulfillment, happy life, and well-being and flourishing, it really requires deep and permanent sustainable change, which I call transformation. So if we understand how human beings, which means us, we are able to figure out what helps us to transform, not only to change certain thing or certain behavior for a period of time and just kind of fool ourselves or lie to ourselves just to get some reward or punish or avoid the punishment, which are the typical motivators that have been used and overused for the last decades that I'm criticizing in my talks. And I'm really encouraging for all of us to forget about this, because they are really very short-term and limited. And because they are predominantly working with our centers of fear and avoiding the pain or looking for the pleasure. So the difference when we think about human behavioral transformation, human attitudinal transformation, it all comes down how we can sustain change. So therefore, if we understand what helps ourselves to sustain the changes, starting from internally, how do we feel about ourselves? How do we want to improve our lives, starting from the tiny things? How do we take care about our health on a daily basis? How do we brush our teeth, floss our teeth? How we choose what groceries do we purchase? How do we cook our meals? How do we care about our sleep? Those are the tiny things, but once we change them, then we can enable what I call in my work a transformation gene. The transformation gene is something that I refer conceptually, which speaks about our innate ability to understand what the change means and what the transformation means. Historically, we wouldn't be here if in our evolution, our DNA and our genetics wouldn't know and wouldn't see all of the change transformation over thousands of years. So it cannot be otherwise that we actually have in our super intelligent machine, our body, have already inbuilt this concept of transformation gene. It's the only question is to tap into it. And sometimes people need to be reminded they have it. And then the awareness has to be brought to that point where they start with the small things in their lives and they started changing them. And then once they have acquired the confidence and they realize if they can change a small thing in their lives permanently, then they can apply the same mindset, the same power, and the same energy to transform anything in their lives that they want, the personal lives, and then the lives of others. Why the others? Because we human beings in our social fabric have the naturally inbuilt mechanism, which is called social mirroring. It's how we are mirroring and shining out and highlighting that what do we have achieved in ourselves is actually available for all of the other people. So one person achieves a certain thing and finally transforms in a particular behavior. Other people cannot really miss that because they will see, oh, and they will ask, Agnis, you become a different person after you stop doing this and after you stop doing that. And this is not about that they see that my behavior changed, but also they see that I have become a different person. I have become an upgraded human being because I've made this transformation. So this is the basics that we really, as the designers, as a city architects, as a people really caring about the human flourishing at scale, we have to take into account. Why I'm so much emphasizing that is because I trust and I believe we have great engineers, we have great architects, we have great urban specialists. We have them and they do their work to the best possible way that they can do at this moment, and they will excel with that, and there will be new technologies like artificial intelligence will be getting better and also helping us to advance in the direction that they want. But artificial intelligence will be only really helpful for us if we human beings will be able to give really meaningful instructions about what is actually helpful for us to change. Otherwise, we are just tapping into the random places and trying different technology, which of course is fun. We human beings love to play. So that's why we love to play games, also in computers. And then that's why we play games with the new designs of the cities and so forth. And it's all fun. But we are not only needing fun, we need really human transformation towards flourishing. And we really would love that all of what we built as the experiences around us would really be supporting our journey toward achieving this health and well-being states. Therefore, one of the practical calls to actions that I really considered lately is how we collectively, scientists, engineers, designers, architects, planners, decision makers, governance, communities, would be reminding ourselves how we could think of including in all of our work possible tiny elements, even architectural elements, that would remind who we are. It's not about the utility of that bus or the experience only about that bus station, or whether that bus station is currently having this liquid, the sanitizer dispenser, which is great because we are getting ready for any other pandemic. And that's what I'm speaking about. One of the cities, one of the beautiful cities on this planet, which is Paris. But not only that, but also some tiny hints and references, what it means to be a human being. We are not only about the utility. We also have this hedonic part, which is about pleasure. And we also need to be in a very balanced state with what makes sense to us, biologically, mentally, physically, evolutionary. So therefore, maybe to summarize that, it would be how to think of everyday work that we will continue doing, integrating with the small, tiny reminders about who we are and what is essential for us. And if we speak about transforming cities, if we speak about transforming cities for human flourishing, and if we really get to the flourishing cities will have in their design, in their architecture, in the experience in that design, those tiny, small reminders everywhere. And it can start with the language, it can start with the pictograms, it can start with the very easy implementable things. So that would be maybe one of the primary calls to action that we can actually start doing today. And with this, I would encourage everyone to contribute your work, your expertise, your experience in collectively finding ways to intertwine the deep understanding of the human nature with technology and with the understanding of how we collectively live in urban spaces to bring a better life for ourselves, including all of our experiences, private, family, community, society, organizational, business, because it's all part of our universe, our unified field of experience. So I look forward to co-create together with you.
Well, welcome back. And Beth, thank you for hosting such a strong moment and morning on the arts and sciences. There was a lot to think about there. Poppy really had us thinking about community and about ethics. She's talking about a world where buildings are responsive, which means that we're sensing and seeing everything. That could either be more panopticon or more wonder.
Exactly. And the passion with which she talks about not just the potential of the technology, because we've got a lot of that already in the mix, but the necessity of intentional design and being at the service of the user is, I think, quite important. And she articulated that in terms of trust. And that trust needs to happen not just in terms of technology and people, but also policy and interconnected aspects of how we're building future cities.
Yeah, this points out the fact that early on when we bring technology out, technologists aren't really thinking a lot about these societal responsibility things. I often tell the story that when I went off to Apple in the early days, we wanted to change the world, but the world didn't really care because we were a little tiny industry. Well, now people are deeply aware every day of technology and its ethical issues. And what we're hearing here is all of this technology is not just seeping into our cities, but into all interior architecture, into rooms, and sensing us, right? So if we don't take into account both the human issues and the ethical issues, there's just gonna be a whole lot of fights. If we think fighting about space is a big deal, very important to have intentional design here, which is a good thing for us to go work on in our breakout coming up.
Yes, so that's a really good prompt for people to take into the rooms with them. So Tom's talk, what did you think some of the takeaways were from that?
You know, Tom, I thought, brought together two things. One is this classic, very human-oriented, Northern European, you know, beautiful urban design sense, but also systems thinking infused what he was talking about, right? He had each of those projects, he had these diagrams that tried to bring into account kind of all of the components of the things that were going on and quantifying them. And that lets us think about things in kind of a systems and mathematical and holistic way, and then act on them. We've had systems thinking for 50 years. You think about climate models and population models and stuff, but it's only when you have lots of sensors and real-time compute power that your entire project and building can sense and respond in real time. And I think that gives us more to manage. And he had some specific examples of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when IKEA and some of his other clients, he really is trying to think about sustainable in the traditional and very Dutch sense of how the engineering happens, but also sustainable in relationship to different points of view, different types of people who are using the space or who the space is designed for, and making that as the baseline, that it's not just the engineering, but is social aspects. And he even talks about relations of power in terms of what happens with how they're working through problems in design. And I think that kind of overlapping is very helpful in when we go in to talk about what kind of design experiments or technologies we want to start playing with here. I think those are good prompts.
And Agnis brings onto the thing a real deep into this whole question of flourishing and mindfulness, which I thought was a very interesting addition to the whole architecture and city conversation.
Yeah, Agnis, I think what we heard in Agnis's talk is people are doing very interesting work with the built environment, with technologies, and his point of transformation or innovation as transformation is we need to look at ourselves. So the kind of addition that he is giving us in terms of city design is how do we build into that with the smart tech and this and that, prompts to remind us to be mindful, prompts to remind us to be ourselves or be our best selves. You know, there's a long history there in terms of human potential and other modes of looking at these things. And there's also a good invitation, particularly with the conversations around inequality and bias and these things that are happening right now. Part of what Agnis is saying is each of us are able to step toward kind of like a better self. So that's an interesting part of thinking about what's a built environment or what's a thriving environment.
As we all now kind of go into our cohorts and breakouts, we really have four ideas that I've heard that are really interesting provocations: ethics, trust, system, self. Ethics, because as we put all this new technology in, boy, that's important. Trust, because even more than community, it's trust that's the objective function, thing that has to be there, that things are built on. Systems, as Tom brings up, because with all of this data technology, we can manage things as systems, and self grounds us back into mindfulness and flourishing.
I think those are not lightweight things for us to bring into the breakout groups. Thanks.
And that's why we have this entire Audacity of project with Mistletoe, for which this is just the beginning. Everyone enjoy the breakouts. I will see you back in the morning for our third day when we move into places.
Thanks so much, Beth. Take care.